What up, guys? It's Eli. It's been a while since I've shared my testimony, and there's been a lot of changes in my life recently that have changed my perspective on some things. For those who don't know, I was born with a birth defect called Spina Bififda. When I was in my mom's womb, my spine didn't develop properly, leaving my spinal cord open and exposed. This led to it becoming tethered, and 5 days after I was born, I had to have spinal cord surgery. The doctors told my parents that I would never be able to walk or do things that normal kids can do, but by God's grace, they were wrong. I had a normal childhood. I ran, I played sports, and I played drums and many other things. But when I was 13, I started experiencing symptoms that would lead the doctors to discovering that my spinal cord had gotten tethered again, and that I would have to get another spinal cord surgery. Getting spinal cord surgery at the age of 13 is scary, and the risks that come with it are even scarier. I had many fears going into the surgery, and afterwards, a lot of these fears became a reality. Surgery didn't go as planned, and as a result, I lost feeling in my left foot and most of my left leg, some of the function in my bladder, and some other things. And I remember after the surgery questioning God and asking Him why the things I prayed and begged for not to happen happened. I remember this being a time where I realized that my life wasn't in my hands and that God controlled my future. So I was born into a Christian family. And growing up, I would claim to be a Christian if asked, but I wasn't really living for Christ. It was around this time when my faith became real to me. Although I was angry and confused at God, He was never absent. He was working in and through that situation to help me look and act more like Christ. After the surgery, I became serious about my faith, because even in the pain, I saw God's provision for me. I chose to start living for Christ, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude for what Jesus did for me by dying on the cross for my sins. My life verse around this time became 2 Corinthians 12, verses 8 through 10. Paul here is described as having a thorn in his flesh, and like me, he pleaded with God, but didn't get the answer he desired. But his response to this inspired a shift in my perspective. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness and insults and hardships and persecutions and in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." God's power being made perfect in weakness and my strength coming from my own weakness is a concept that was tough for me to grasp, but important. I always viewed Spina Bififda as a curse, and although my birth defect is a result of the fallen world we live in, I saw that God could use it for good, and that is when I began to see it as a gift and not a curse. See, I could choose to be angry at God and question His decision to let me go through this painful surgery and now have these afflictions that I will have to deal with for the rest of my life, or question His goodness. Or I could let Him shift my perspective on why He allows my suffering. Some of you may know that in the past 2 years, I've had a lot of health struggles. In 2022, I started getting symptoms that would lead the doctors to finding out that my spinal cord had gotten tethered again, that I would have to go through the same surgery that I went through when I was 13. And I had this surgery, and again, there was complications. There were spinal fluid leaks and problems with wound healings that would lead me to get 4 more surgeries on my back and my spinal cord. And I spent a total of 64 days in the hospital. And then this year, in 2023, my spinal cord got tethered again. And I would have to go through that same surgery again, and again, there was more complications. This time, the complications led to me getting brain surgery. There was a lot of leaking going on, and to resolve this, they put a tube in my brain that would drain the spinal fluid from my brain in efforts to help relieve my back from the pressure so that it could heal. And this seemed to work until 2 months later when I started getting bad headaches, and after a while the doctors found the issue to be high pressure with the spinal fluid in my brain. And to relieve this, I got another brain surgery where they put a shunt in my brain. This has a tube and a valve that routes the excess spinal fluid from my brain down my neck into my abdomen to regulate the high pressure in my brain. This year, from June to October, I spent a total of 101 days inpatient in the hospital. And this year has been by far the hardest year of my life. And in the past 2 years having 10 surgeries, God has taught me so much. So no matter how bad my circumstances were, there was never a point where I had more to complain about than to be grateful for. The pain I experienced gave me a better appreciation for the gospel. Because no matter how much pain I was in, Jesus had it worse, and He chose it willingly for us. There's this image that I found powerful that I made my lock screen when I was in the hospital. And it was this drawing of Jesus' back after He was flogged, the verse from Isaiah 53 that says, "By His stripes we are healed." And I began to feel lucky that I can relate to Jesus in the slightest way, that we both have stripes on our back. I know that mine don't compare to his. He endured them for the joy set before him. Throughout this surgery, I experienced a lot of fear in my head, and there's a lot of what if questions. Like, what if God decides to take the ability to use my legs and I'm bound to a wheelchair for the rest of my life? What if I can never drum again, or have kids, or go back to work? Or even as I'm recording this, I've only been home from the hospital for 2 weeks, and I don't know next week if I'm going to be here recovering and continuing my recovery process, or I'll be back in the hospital with something new. And if I'm being honest, I have serious worries for my future, and a lot of those worries, or a lot of those what if questions still apply. Like, what if my spinal cord gets tethered again next year? What is my quality of life going to be like when I'm 40 if my back is already bad now? Will I be able to walk and drum? How does this work with a potential spouse? Am I going to live my life surgery to surgery, always wondering if something is wrong? I don't know the answers to any of these questions, but I trust the one that does. Jesus says that in this world we will have trouble, but to take heart, because he has overcome the world. I don't know the middle of my story, but I know the end of it. I will be with Jesus for eternity with a glorified body that isn't afflicted with the effects of Spina Bififda or sin, because I've decided to place my trust in Christ. And if I know the end of my story, the middle of my story doesn't really matter. Those what if questions become even if questions, because even if all the worst outcomes to my questions come to pass, God is still good, and he's working in and through me to glorify himself, and my ultimate future is secured. If God thinks I can glorify him best from the seat of a wheelchair, and that's how he can best use me, then so be it. To him be the glory. If I live my life surgery to surgery, and I have chronic pain for the rest of my life, but God uses me to encourage and show people that you can have a joy and a peace that surpasses understanding in the midst of difficult circumstances, then it is worth it. I can't choose my circumstances, but I can choose how I react to them. Joy and gratitude are a choice, and they are a choice that I want to choose when God allows me to suffer. It has been so cool to me to see how God has been able to use my story to encourage people. In the midst of pain, sometimes it is hard to see the purpose of it all. But in hindsight, looking back, it is so cool to see God's faithfulness and provision on display.